welcome to the Marthaberry Museum. We're so glad to have you all here. I think we have a few eagle enthusiasts in the room and maybe at home live streaming this. So thank you so much for everyone that's here, but also tuning in online. That's a fun feature. So this is the first of the Sanctuary at Berry lecture series that we are hosting here at the Marthaberry Museum in conjunction with our new exhibition, Sanctuary at Berry, Wildlife Photography by Gena Flanigen. And it's fitting to start with the bald eagles, as this was the first species that really grabbed Gena's attention on our campus, and she'll be happy to tell you more about that after the lecture. So we are going to be listening to Dr. Carleton, Dr. Reneé Carleton here speak, and there will be a Q&A session afterwards. And then you'll be able to actually tour through our gallery. Gena will be there and able to give you some of her perspective of the images. Obviously, she took them, she knows best. And I'll be there to speak as well. So we're just so glad to have you all here, and we're ready to get started. So I know that many of you are very familiar with Dr. Carleton's extensive work here at Berry and also just for the ornithological field. She's been at Berry since 2000 as an associate professor of biology. And she is also, when she's not teaching, she's working on behalf of the eagles, working on behalf of the bluebirds on campus, but also conducting research into avian parasites and diseases. Very fascinating work. And so she has just such an important role here on campus, and we're just thrilled to be able to learn more about what she knows about the Berry eagles. So, turn it over.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. And I think you are probably as enthralled as I am with the eagles and the amazing work that Gena's done. I hope you'll have a chance to go through the gallery and see the photographs that she's made of not just the eagles, but the other wildlife here on campus. It's really, really super work, and it's my pleasure to have made friends with Gena a few years ago. We kind of bumped into each other out at Garden Lakes. And I had seen a few of her photographs and heard that there was someone taking eagle pictures, and I was out there because I actually go bird watching once in a while. And I saw this lady taking pictures, and I just kind of walked up to her and I said, "Are you Gena?" And she says, "Yes." And then I guess she recognized me, and she says, "Oh my God, you're Dr. Carleton."
That's true.
Hey, it's Reneé. So, okay. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the bald eagle as a species. I'm going to give you some ecology information, nesting information, talk about the history of the eagles here, and then answer your questions at the end, including, I think, probably the million-dollar question about why the B11 passed away this season. So we'll get into that as we go along. So we'll get started. I just want to give you an idea of where you can find bald eagles in the U.S. and North America. There's a distribution map that is a little dated, I have to admit. If I can press the laser pointer. You see in Georgia, especially where we are, it says that they are winter residents. We do get a number of migrating eagles that come down from Canada and the upper Midwest and other areas where eagles are going to be found quite commonly. But I think now it's fair to say that we are a year-round site for eagles here in Northwest Georgia. Historically, they are going to be on the coastline, but as the population has increased, they have started to move inland, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So in terms of the male and the female, females are larger than the males are. Now that's kind of unusual in the bird world, where typically the male is going to be the more robust of the two, but in all birds of prey, the female is actually larger than the male. So here's a picture of Ma and Pa, as we call them, because we don't give them official names, but you notice how much bigger she is compared to him. And females are going to average in terms of weight between 10 and 14 pounds. The southern subspecies of bald eagle, which is what we have here, are smaller than the northern subspecies. And males are going to average somewhere between 8 to 12 pounds. So a lot of times when people say, well, how big is that really? If you think about kind of your average Thanksgiving turkey size, that's about the size of an eagle body. Now, the wingspan is something quite different though, because their wingspan from tip to tip can be 6 to 7.5 feet. Now, I'm 5'7" now that I've shrunk a little bit, but if you can imagine, if we had me turn horizontally, I'm not quite 6 feet, and that's how big the wingspan is. You really don't get an appreciation for how large they are unless they fly right over you, which you can have that happen here quite easily. So they're very large birds. Lifespan is about 25 years on average in the wild. The oldest known wild eagle was 30 years old. We know that because he was banded as a nestling or an eaglet way back 30 years ago. Unfortunately, he was hit by a car when he was feeding on carrion on the side of the road, and so we lost that one. In captivity, they can live longer because of the ensured food source that they're getting and the care, but generally about 25 years in the wild. Now, here's an important statistic to keep in mind. Up to 70% do not survive to adulthood. It's very tough to be a young eagle. There's a lot of hazards for them to overcome to reach that age when they can start contributing to the population. Now, they do sexually mature where they can start breeding and producing eggs when they're about 4.5 to 5 years old. That's when they're going to have the white head and white tails, and I'll show you in a minute a progression of the plumage changes. They're what we call reproductively monogamous, meaning that the male and the female will stay together for as long as both members of that pair are living. Now, if one member of the pair is lost, they will seek out another mate and continue on with their new partner. But they stay together during the breeding season, both contribute to incubation, to feeding of the young, to protecting the nesting territory. And then on the off season, when they're not breeding, they occasionally will get together again, but generally they go their separate ways, and then they come back into the breeding territory to start a new family. They produce anywhere between 0 and 3 eggs per breeding season. Some eagles will go through the motions of mating and building the nest and all of that that's involved with the breeding cycle, but they actually don't produce eggs. Whereas others may go ahead and lay 1, maybe 2, or 3 eggs. So 3 would be the top number or the maximum that they would lay. Now, eagles are highly opportunistic in both feeding and nesting. The example of the eagle that was hit by a car and killed at 30 years old is an example of how opportunistic they are. They will take carrion or roadkill. That's an easy meal for them. They don't have to go out and hunt for it, so that's something they will seek out. And if you've watched the Eagle Cam, you've seen very frequently squirrels and raccoons and bunnies and things like that being brought into the nest that they didn't have to hunt, they just picked up from the roadway. So tell your friends and neighbors, be aware that there may be a large bird on the side of the road that will become startled and jump up while you're driving by, so just be kind of careful about that. Now, in terms of nesting opportunities, they will investigate other nests, and if they can, they will try to take over that nest for their own, because that means less energy that they have to expend in order to create that nest for their future offspring. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too as we move through the presentation. Now, here's a slide that shows you how the plumage changes from an eaglet or young juvie, as we call them, that has just fledged, all the way through to definitive adulthood. And as you know, our young eaglets are dark in color. They have the dark bill. They have a lot of mottling in the tail and underneath the wings. But generally their dark body color is characteristic of a very young eagle. As they progress, here's basic plumage at 1.5 years. You can see that the tail is starting to become wider and the bill is subtly changing from the dark color to some yellow here at the corners of the beak. Here is a 2.5-year-old. You can see dramatically now we're starting to get some more white in the head. The beak or the bill is turning more yellow, and there's more white in the tail. Here's a 3.5-year-old. Notice the distinctive kind of eye line that this young adult has. And now you can see that the bill has gotten quite a bit more yellow. And also there's a very prominent, what we call the terminal band, or this dark edging of coloration on the tail feathers. A 4.5-year-old still has a little bit of dark coloration around the eyes, but now the bill is basically going to be a yellow color. The tail is almost completely white. There's a little bit of darkness still left in there until we get to definitive adult, which is pure white head and tail and the very, very yellow bill that we see at 5 years old. Of course, here's a couple of our little ones. They're covered in that gray fuzzy down when they first hatch, and as they grow, they start developing pin feathers, and those will develop into their juvenile plumage feathers as they continue to go along. All right, now, I can't talk about eagles without talking about the time when we almost lost them as a species. In the early 1800s, which was when there were still a lot of eagles here in what was the early United States, there were an estimated 1,000 nesting pairs. Now that's in the lower, what would be now the lower 48. There's always been more eagles up in Alaska and Canada than there have been in the lower 48. In the early 1900s, eagles were considered fairly common on the Georgia coast. Now that goes along with the eagle habitat preferences. Eagles like to be around water, estuaries, rivers, lakes, a coastline. That's where they're going to find one of their favorite food sources, which is fish. So we would naturally expect to see them where there's a lot of water, and our Georgia coastline is where eagle habitat primarily was. By the 1940s, though, the numbers were down to about 417 nesting pairs in the U.S. Now go back and think about up to 70% don't make it to breeding age, and they also may only produce up to 3 eggs per year. Compare that with other nesting birds like, say, bluebirds that could have 3 clutches of 5 eggs each during a single breeding season. So we have a species that produces a low number of offspring that takes a long time to mature, and that is one of the reasons they became so imperiled. By the 1950s, they were uncommon on the Georgia coast, but still being seen occasionally as a transient winter visitor. In 1962 in Georgia, there were only 4 nests documented, again on the coast. In 1970, only 1 nest, and then between 71 and 78, there were no nests in Georgia that we know of. Now, part of the reason for this is that there was a lot of habitat degradation going on. As we moved in and became more populous, we started taking up those prime real estate areas on the coast that eagles needed to have their nesting sites. And so with the loss of that, no more nesting sites, eagles had to move to more appropriate areas. So habitat degradation and human encroachment was one of the main factors. Overhunting of waterfowl. In addition to fish, eagles will catch an awful lot of ducks and a coot, which is a duck-like species of waterfowl. So because we were hunting these, we're removing them from their food availability, and that caused pressure on the species. Shooting and bounty hunting. This is unbelievable, isn't it? Look at these pictures of eagles that have been shot for a bounty. People thought these are birds that are going to take my livestock, take my chickens. We need to get rid of them. So the U.S. government and state governments actually provided money for people to go out and do this. And then, of course, as everybody knows, the use of DDT pesticides did impact also the ability of eagles to reproduce. DDT interferes with calcium metabolism so that the females are unable to put enough calcium into the eggshells, and the result is, very thin eggshells that literally crushed under the weight of the incubating body. So now we're not having any babies being produced, there are no nesting areas, there are other pressures, eagle numbers plummeted. But thankfully, we had some conservationists step in and say we really need to do something to stop this trend. And there was a Bald Eagle Protection Act that was passed by Congress in 1940, the Endangered Species Preservation Act, which was a precursor of the Endangered Species Act in 1967, the ESA in 1973, so see, Congress can actually get something done once in a while. Eagles were federally endangered in 1978, and then Georgia passed its own Wildlife Protection Act in 1974. Now, thanks to those protections, you couldn't shoot an eagle, you couldn't impact where they were nesting, you couldn't take a nest, you couldn't disturb them. Their numbers started to come back. And they were downlisted to threatened status in 1995 and removed from the endangered species list in 2007. Yay! That's tremendous. All right, so this graph shows you basically how the population has rebounded from the 60s to 2014, so it's a little bit dated, but you can see the trend is a kind of a rather slow increase at first, but then the numbers started to build and build until we have what we see there as the red bar. Then these are nesting pairs in the lower 48 states. So in the US, the total population estimate is around 100,000. Most of those are going to be young eagles, not necessarily breeding adults. So they're still at risk, and we have to keep these things in mind. Lead poisoning is probably right now the #1 big danger to eagles. Unfortunately, some hunters, duck hunters, are still using lead shot. And when they miss, some of that lead goes into the substrate, the environment where these ducks are feeding. They can pick up that lead, and if those ducks are taken by an eagle who ingests, as we know, all body parts, they could possibly ingest lead also. They also, because they're opportunistic, if they find ducks that have been killed but not picked up by the hunter and ingest the lead, again, they can become poisoned, and it causes very, very serious neurological problems, and very often the eagles will die very quickly. Other forms of poisoning like mercury, poison baits, and also pentobarbital, which is a euthanasia solution, is out there in the environment. Collisions with not only vehicles, but other man-made structures. Here's a picture of a wind farm, and here's a dead eagle. When those blades are turning, they actually are rather hard for the birds to see, and if they are flying through the area and they see prey, they may actually fly right into the blades and are killed from the impact with the blades. So unfortunately, even though solar is being promoted as a green form of energy, it really is not. There are no green forms of energy. There's a consequence to everything. Illegal shooting. There are still people who shoot eagles. Electric power line contact. Some of them will try to perch on a power line tower and unfortunately become electrocuted. Oil spills. During the Exxon Valdez disaster, 250 eagles died after being coated with oil. And then there's a new disease called avian vacuolar myelopathy, which is caused by when they ingest a coot that has itself ingested a certain type of aquatic water plant that can carry a toxin. The coots become disoriented because it's a neurological problem with them. They become easy prey for the eagles. The eagles will then ingest that coot, ingest the toxin, and they themselves become poisoned by this toxin. The plant that the coots are eating is an invasive species of aquarium plants that somebody very innocently dumped into a waterway, and that plant just took off and started reproducing just fine, and unfortunately that has impacted the environment, and it's very, very difficult to get rid of. But the good news is that we are seeing population expansion because of the Bald Eagle Protection Act that is still in force. You still can't shoot them or harass them or take their nest or any of that without a permit from the US government. But I also think the reason that we are seeing eagles here is because of the reservoirs that have been created throughout the state and our neighboring states. So think about Lake Allatoona. There's 1 or 2 nests there. Lake Lanier, there's a couple of nests there. Carter's Lake, there's a couple of nests there. And then the Rocky Mountain Project, which is just north of us, we know that there's an eagle nest there. All of these provide habitat that are very, very favorable for eagles to reproduce. Lots of water, areas that are not disturbed, habitat that eagles are going to find very, very conducive to breeding. And I believe that's part of the reason why we are seeing so many eagles here in northwest Georgia now. Now, the Georgia DNR has done aerial surveys to keep track of how many nests are active in the state. Now, they have discontinued that this year, but last year's survey found 218 nesting territories and 142 successful nests. A successful nest is one in which they have eaglets that are going to fledge. So 142 successful nests. That's 29% more than the most recent 10-year average. And now that means that 68 counties out of the 130-something that we have here in Georgia have active nests. So if you haven't purchased an eagle tag yet, your dollars actually go directly toward protecting eagles and also protecting other habitat for wildlife. So it's a really good deal. All right, so now the Berry Eagle story. Well, back in 2012, it was February, and I went back and looked at my records, and it was right around February 18th or so, February 19th, 20th, sometime around in there. A student came to me, I think he was a sophomore at the time, his name was Kevin Shepard, and he knew that I was a bird nerd, so he came and said, "Dr. Carleton, did you know there's an eagle nest on campus?" And I said, "Well, no, I didn't." And I got really excited because I wanted to go see this. I said, "Well, tell me about it. Tell me where it is." Now, I have to add some information to this because just today I learned that we had another student that identified the eagle nest about the same time. And his name is Alex. Alex, would you stand up? This is Alex Eason. Alex actually also found that nest. Okay, thank you, Alex. And he reported it to his principal at Berry Elementary School, and somehow the signals didn't quite get to the right place. And this was actually the first time I had heard about Alex when I got the email from his dad today. So from now on, I'll be talking about Kevin and Alex as being the students who found the nest. Well, so when Kevin told me where the nest was, which is, as we know now, behind the Cage Center, I was like, "Oh, really?" I thought it would be up around our reservoir on the mountain campus because there's water, it's undisturbed, there's lots of good habitat there, but no, they chose this tree. That's it, there's the nest. That's right behind the parking lot at the Cage Center. Now, that caused a little bit of a concern. All right, so that's where the tree is. This is the parking lot. That's the Cage Center. The rectangle I inserted there is not to scale, but that was approximately the footprint of our proposed football stadium. Now, technically, that is outside the 330-foot buffer zone that we must maintain according to the Fish and Wildlife Service. They actually gave us a permit to go ahead and build the stadium right there. Now, we did have to set aside some land up around the reservoir to earn that permit, but we did have a permit for that location. Now, after the eagle cam took off, and we realized that the eagles were going to start coming back and continuing to nest here on campus, the administration decided to move the football stadium about to that location. But then they wisely decided to move it. There's Maple Drive, the service road. So now it's down here where its present location is. Now I'm going to tell you, it cost the college a lot of money to resurvey that not once but twice in order to get the football stadium where it currently is. So I think our administration has done a tremendous job in making sure that the eagles are not disturbed by the college activities that we maintain here at Berry. If you're not familiar with campus, just quickly, there's Martha Berry Highway or US 27. There's our main entrance. There's the traffic circle. Again, that's the Cage Center. That's the Krannert Center. That's the administration building, the science building. But look, you would have never thought that an eagle would choose that location. And I was flabbergasted when I heard that's where it was. So I went out and I looked for it and I found the nest. And I called the DNR, local DNR office, and I said, you know, we have an eagle nest on campus. Oh, really? Sure. So they came out and looked and said, well, no, that's not an eagle nest, it's a red-tailed hawk nest. And I thought, oh, okay, that's probably the case. I would not expect to have an eagle nest here. Well, I sent one of my student assistants out to monitor the nest, and he started watching it on a regular basis, and sure enough, like Alex saw, we started to see the eagles bringing in sticks to this nest. Now, this is February. It's really late in the breeding season, and by the time we got into March, it was about late March, they basically gave up and they left, and we weren't sure they were going to come back. But they did the next October, and they've been there, of course, ever since. Now, I don't have a real good aerial view that expands on this, but if you think about eagles in water, the Oostanala is over here. We've got the quarry over here. Garden Lakes is up here, and our reservoir's there. You go a little bit further, you got Weiss Lake, and you got the Rocky Mountain Project up here. So there's eagle habitat all around. They just, I think, did find a red-tailed hawk nest here and decided, hey, it's already partially built for me. Why should I go through the trouble? I'm going to pick here to nest. And they've been there ever since. All right, so as I say, the rest is history. We are in our 6th breeding season. And in August of 2012, we went ahead and decided to put in a camera that is what is now the approach cam, but this was a camera that was pointed at the nest from the parking lot. It was a grainy picture, not great quality. But we were able to actually see eaglets around mid-February of 2013, so we knew we actually had success. We had 2 eaglets being produced. And we designated them B1 and B2. We do not name our eagles. They're wild animals. We want to respect that. So the B is for Berry. The 1 and 2 are the order in which they're hatched. All right, season 2, it was 2013-14. In the summer of 2013, we installed our first in-tree nest cam that now pointed down at the nest so you could see everything that was going on. And in February 11th, you can see we had the snowstorm. There's Mom tight to the nest. It's quite a lot of snow around her on the nest and also on her, but she stayed there and incubated those 2 eggs. And we had 1 hatch, which was B3. She hatched on February 22nd, and 90 days later, May 22nd, she fledged. All right, seasons 3, 4, and 5. We installed the 2nd nest cam in the season between 2 and 3, which now points directly down into the nest with a microphone, so you could actually hear things that were going on. We had B4 and B5, and then 2015-16, B6 and B7, 2016-17, B8 and B9. And there's, I don't know, whoops, which one this actually is. But there's a couple of our little ones, and you can see right here, this baby's just coming out of the egg. Now, I do have a little facsimile of an eagle egg, so you can get an idea of the size of it. Normally, I bring a chicken egg, so you can also do a comparison, but I ate all of my Easter eggs, so I don't have, but anyway, chicken egg's about that big. So you can see that the eagle egg is bigger than a chicken egg, but it's not terribly large. Some people would think it was quite a bit larger than that. Okay. All right, so here's season 6. B10 hatched on February 12th, and B11 hatched on the 13th. Now, unfortunately, as you know, we lost B11. And I'll talk about, I'm sure somebody's going to ask a question about that, and I'll address that when we have our Q&A. B10 at 16 days old. Now, when you're the sole eaglet and you have your full attention of your parents, this is what happens. It looks like a butterball turkey, as somebody said. And there's actually a video of B10 reaching around to preen and falling over backwards and unable to get up because of having a little bit of extra weight there. All right, now here's B10 at 5.5 weeks old. We're about 6 weeks till fledge. Look at the difference from that cute little fuzzy baby now to this rather gangly, but very obviously a young eagle. All right, so now I'll do a timeline so you get an understanding for what happens during our breeding season. They return in the late summer, early fall, and there's a lot of pair bonding going on. They start doing what we call nestorations. They bring in new branches. Now they break branches off of trees. They don't pick them up off of the ground. So they'll choose a branch and actually work on it, work it loose, and then carry it to the nest. And they add to that nest every year. Here is a picture of Ma, who broke off more than she could chew. That stick ended up being about 12 feet long and weighing about as much as we think she weighs. Now she has an injury. Whoops, again, here we go. This foot, you can see, she's not holding the branch with it. That's her injured leg, so she's carrying this whole thing with one leg. Now she didn't make it to the nest with that. She actually dropped it about 6 feet from the photographer that took that picture. So you gotta kind of be aware when you're out there. So this is the nest in 2012. That's the nest last year. It's even bigger now. When Georgia Power, who gratefully, thank God for them, they install the cameras for us and do the service. When they're up there, they'll take measurements, and it's larger now than a king-size bed, and we think it weighs around a ton. So it's quite the large nest now. All right, now, along with getting ready to lay eggs, this happens. This is copulation. All right, now they have a favorite place they like to go. This is called the love tree. And the photographers know which one is the love tree, because when they go over there, they're going to do this. About 5 days after that, we have our first egg, and the eggs are laid about 3 days apart, so we start looking for the next egg to be produced, and there we are. You can see that they form, this is called the egg bowl, a little kind of cup where the eggs are nestled down into, and there's lots of nice straw and dry grass, so everything is nice and soft. All right, after 35 to 37 days on incubation on average, we start to have a hatching. And we get our two cute little babies. Here's Ma starting to feed them for the first time. All right, and then there's always drama at the berry nest. This is during the B3 year. This is a subadult. Whoops, go back. There we go. Here we go. There's a subadult. There's that eye line that I pointed out before, and this eagle is very curious about what's going on in that nest, and you can see that Ma is protecting her baby and screaming her head off for Dad to come and chase this intruder off. So again, eagles are very opportunistic. I don't know what the true motives of that eagle was, if it was going to try to take over the nest, possibly eat B3, but that eagle was successfully chased away, and B3 fledged just fine. This is a raccoon, that roadkill that they are bringing in, and you can see that we've got two waiting for lunch or dinner. So they do get quite a variety of food items brought into the nest. Right, they get to the point where they're getting ready to fledge, and in order to do that first flight, they have to have the wing muscles ready to go. So they do what we call branching, which is getting up out of the nest onto the branches of the pine tree and they do a lot of wing sizing. So they flap those wings, they'll start jumping from branch to branch, giving everybody a heart attack when they get too close and possibly look like they're going to fall. But they'll continue to exercise until those wing muscles and those feathers are fully developed and they're ready to fly. And we get basically a fledge about 90 days post-hatch on average. So this is our beautiful B3. You can see the modeling under her wings and on her tail, and there she is, ready to go off and be her own eagle. So there's our beautiful pair, mom and dad, or ma and pa as we like to call them. We are so blessed to have them here on campus. I can't imagine any other place where you can go to the edge of a parking lot, go sit in a very comfortable Viking furniture chair and sit and watch eagles for as long as you want to. So we are so terribly blessed again that it's just, to me, it's just fabulous. So in closing, I want to say a special thank you to Gena, because I've used, except for maybe a couple of pictures, these have been all her pictures. Some of them were taken this year. This is a picture of Pa flying into the nest. I also want to thank and acknowledge Eddie Ellsbury, Chris Kozel, and Lee Sherwin with our public relations department. They are the ones who do a lot of the work in the background, answering questions, making sure that Facebook posts are done on time and that everyone knows what's going on with the eagles. Cameron Jordan is in charge of the nest cam, making sure that it's running when it needs to. And of course, Rachel, thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved it. I used to love talking about the eagles. So with that, I think it's time for Q&A. All right. Thank you so much. All right, who has a question?
Dr. Carleton, you want to tell us what happened to B11? Is that what
B11.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We think it's B11.
Somebody posted in the middle of the night where it got really close to the edge and
Right.
then sort of like tottered over.
Right.
But it was only like 10 or 11 days old at that time.
It was between a week and 2 weeks old, so right around 10, 11 days
Okay,
old.
So, and we'd almost think it was too young to be able to get out of
Right.
the pocket and get
I thought it was very unusual that it was moving around in the nest as much as it did. There had been a report during the day that had gone near the edge and then gone back into the bowl and actually went to sleep and was being fed normally. Now, I got a call. I started getting texts around 8:30, or I guess it was 9 o'clock, and my husband said, "Don't answer that." I started getting more texts, and I knew something was up. So I went and got my cell phone, and I called one of the dedicated watchers, and I said, "Tell me what's going on." And she said, "It looks like the eaglet has fallen out of the nest." And no one was sure at the time. The video from the approach cam shows the eaglet there, and if you watch closely enough, you can see it fall out, but you have to really watch. So by the time I got off the phone, my husband was already dressed, and he said, "Let's go." So we hopped in our truck and we drove up here, and of course this was around 10:30 by the time I got here, and he pulled up to the edge of the parking lot so he could shine his headlights out there. And I honestly didn't know what I was going to run into. I fortunately had a motorcycle helmet, my husband's helmet, and I had been told you need to wear that if you're going to go out there in case they decide to come down at you. And so I'm going out there with a little flashlight. I fell in the sinkhole. There's a sinkhole out there. I fell in that. I got back up. And, I'm searching around, and I found it. And I have to say my heart dropped. I basically knew that's what was going to be, because that's a long fall from the nest. So I took it and brought it in. We sent it to UGA. The Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Study is based there. The veterinarians there did the post-mortem examination. The cause of death was trauma from the fall. Now, the erratic behavior going to the edge of the nest, and also just before it went over the edge, it was moving its head around quite a bit. What they found was inside of the stomach there was a lot of grass, mixed in with food and scales from fish. I think what happened is that grass got impacted down in the stomach. It was trying to bring up a pellet. If you don't know, a pellet is the undigestible things that birds of prey get rid of because that stuff doesn't move through the digestive tract. And it was trying to get rid of that and couldn't get rid of it and became distressed and started moving around, and because it was dark, it went to the edge and eventually went over. It was very windy that night. I think a gust of wind caught it too. So trauma was the cause of death. Probably the eaglet was distressed because of the impaction. As far as I can, average in Georgia is 1.5 per year. And we're a little more than 1.5. We're right around 1.678, if you want to carry it out however many digits. So we're above the average, but we're still doing pretty good. Anybody else? Yes?
On the wind turbines, the wind farms, especially out west, I'm trying to think that I read somewhere that they're exempted from any federal fines or penalties if they kill.
They are allowed to, and I don't want to say kill because they're not doing it on purpose, but they are exempted from the death of 300 eagles per year. Yes?
Ma's got a bad talon.
Yes.
Will that recover? Will it change?
No, here's what I think is going on with Ma, and I'll also address what we are not going to do. Sometime over the summer, early on, she came back with a very obvious injury to her leg. Now, the leg is deviated away from being straight. Now, I think what happened is she either got her leg caught in something like a branch or got tangled in fishing line and it fractured the leg. The leg healed, but it healed being deviated out. Now, this year we had a lot of conversations about is the leg getting worse because it did seem like the deviation was more severe than it had been. I still feel like the leg has healed, although it's not straight. And a lot of people want us to go catch her, bring her in, try to do something, some kind of repair and rehab, and then release her again. I don't feel, and I'm a veterinarian, I'm pretty familiar with fractures and how they heal. I just feel like that would be the wrong thing to do. It is really stressful for a bird like that to be captured. The only way we could do it is to put some kind of a carcass out somewhere where a billion people aren't going to see it happen and fire a rocket net over her and capture her that way. She could struggle and make that leg worse. She could die from the stress. If you did capture her successfully and put her into, we have a plan that if something does happen, we would take them over to Auburn University where they have the Southeastern Eagle Rehab Center, bird of prey and eagles. And the surgeons have suggested that they could repair that fracture. They would have to re-break the leg, realign it, put in pins, and she would have to recover from that. You have a risk of infection. You have a risk of death from anesthesia. You have a bird that's really stressed out, and I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the Southwest Florida eagle cam. The male from that nest was injured. They took him into rehab. He was doing good. They decided to release him. He fought with a competitor and unfortunately got some pretty serious injuries that became infected, and he died. So we would run the risk of that. And I've had suggestions to say, well, just put her in rehab. I'm sorry, but she is a free eagle. I would never condemn her to that life of being in a cage.
And she seems to be doing fine.
She's doing
had
fine.
flesh and sense.
She breeds, obviously. She takes care of those babies. She picks up branches. She brings in fluff. As far as we can tell, there is no reason to go to that extreme and try to rescue her. And I just am not for that at all.
What could that do to the pair with the male perhaps moving?
Well, if the timing would be essential. If we couldn't get her back at the right period of time, he's going to find another mate. We have, a couple of years ago, we had a young female come in. Ma hadn't come back from wherever she spends the summer vacation. She hadn't come back, and this young female kind of moved in, and he was not driving her away. He was rather entertaining her. Well, if Ma had not come back, he would have taken up with that young female as his next mate. But she came back and she drove her away. So yeah, I think they would, if either one of them passed, they would take up with another eagle. We have enough of them coming around all the time that we would still continue, I think, at this nest, but it would be with a different male or female. Yes, sir.
Dr. Carl, is that about the size of the nest now?
Yes.
That's about-
Not right now. That picture is a couple of years old now. This is a classroom that they watch the Eagle Cam on a regular basis, and they decided that as a project they were going to create a replica. So they asked for measurements on what an eagle nest should be, and the kids gathered up all the sticks and built the nest, and there they are. They're winger sizing and fledging.
Follow-up question. One of the frustrations, I don't say frustration, but I never know how big the eagles are. Because is there any way unobtrusively put a yardstick up there the next time?
Oh,
Or something,
well,
some way for us to
right.
be able to determine.
You know, we could probably do that if we could get Georgia Power. They come on a every other year basis to do service on the cameras. We could probably do that, but I'm telling you, they move sticks around so much. Ma does not like where Pa puts things, and she'll pick them up and she'll move them somewhere else. So somehow, if we secured a meter stick to a branch, I'm sure that they would never be in the right position for you to actually get an idea. What do you think? I do live chats with classrooms. What do you think the kids' favorite thing to see is? No. The poop shot. They want to see the poop shot.
And they do that really young.
Are there any plans to reinforce that nest if it was possible that maybe the tree wouldn't support the nest?
We don't have that in our contingency plan currently. Now, I did mention that there is a sinkhole out there. We have put boulders and things into the sinkhole to try to prevent it from caving in more than it has. Now, that tree is subject to lightning strikes, windstorms. You know, we lost a lot of trees a few years ago when we had a microburst and straight line winds come through here. That nest is really heavy. Now, loblolly pines, which is the species that the pine tree is, they can actually support a whole lot of compressive weight. It's like 12,000 pounds that they can handle going in this direction. So that seems to be okay. Our biggest fear would be pine bark beetle, electric strike, or it comes down during a windstorm. Now, if that happens, it's going to be up to the eagles to decide where they're going to go next. But I'm afraid if we tried to do physically anything to the tree, we're going to stress the tree out, and it will probably become diseased and die. And then it becomes a safety issue. So, yes?
Are there any other nests out on Berry campus?
There are none that we know of right now. There was a second nest in 2013-14 that produced 3 eaglets. It was way out, and the eagles abandoned that nest after that season, and they have not used it since. Now, we have not identified any others. On the Rocky Mountain Project property, which butts up to Berry's property, there is one, but as far as we know, there is not another one on campus right now. Who knows what's going to happen in the near future? So, yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. First, how high is the nest?
The nest itself is about 100 feet up.
And second, couldn't there be some kind of scale put on the camera? Because it's a static camera.
Right.
The-
You know, I don't know. I'm not that technical. It's a stretch for me to do this, as you can see. But anyway, that's a good idea. That's something we could certainly explore and see if it would be possible.
The camera doesn't move.
Right.
So
Right.
you at least have some kind of firm
Mm-hmm.
reference.
Yep. Yes.
Is there any thought to banding any of the young from the nest?
No. We get that question a lot. Or radio tagging them. A lot of people everybody wants to know, where do they go? And our decision has been that we're not going to ban them and we're not going to radio tag them. Number one, Fish and Wildlife Service has to issue the permit from them, and we have to also get a permit from DNR. Because eagles are coming back, and unless there's a very specific research project that would require that, Fish and Wildlife is not going to approve that permit. That's one thing. I am not permitted for that. Now, I can ban bluebirds and other small birds, but my permit does not extend to birds of prey, or especially eagles or other endangered species. It would be incredibly logistically difficult to get somebody, ain't gonna be me, to get up in that nest and corral the babies and ban them. It's stressful for them. I know people do it, you know, a lot. It's stressful for them. It'd be stressful for the adults. It'd be really stressful for the person going up there, because if they decide, the parents decide, hey, this is a threat and they're coming in at you, I've been told if they hit a person, it's like being hit by a car, that it's that much impact force. So we really don't want to do that. You know, everybody wants to know where they go. I would love to know where they go, but because of the stress involved and the danger that we could possibly impose on them, we're not going to do it. Anyone else? Yes.
When they have babies in the nest, do you have any idea how far they travel to get food supply, or stay in
Well, the photographers see them over at Garden Lakes. They're very easy to identify. We know that they spend a lot of time over there catching coots, catching fish. There's a slough on the Berry property that's across the highway. They go over there. They also will fish out of the quarry. So they're in the general area. They're not traveling really all that far. And then, of course, on campus, there's always a dead squirrel somewhere, it seems like. So they.
My address?
Sure. I've got squirrels, come get them. So, yeah. Okay, so let's see, we've got, it's 7. How, you want a funny story or you want more questions? Story, okay, all right. Well, of course, everybody loves them, and I can understand why, and everybody wants to take care of them. You know, it's human nature to want to make sure that something that you care about is being cared for. Well, a few years ago, there was an instance where I think what happened is Ma was being mobbed by crows. We know crows will harass birds of prey. So rather than fly back to the nest, she just flew off, and the crows followed her, where she was gone for, I think it was 3 days. And we started getting calls that people were really concerned that Dad was not going to be able to bring enough food back to the nest. So we had some suggestions, and I always say, well, you know, bless their hearts, they really mean well, but we had a guy say, well, you know, I've got a friend that has a hardware store, and this was right after Easter, right around this time. And we have all of these surplus Easter bunnies. I'm willing to buy them and let them go under the nest. And we said, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you wanting to do something for the eagles, but we're going to decline that offer. Can you imagine seeing a pink Easter bunny being deposited into the nest? And then we had somebody that says, well, you know, they make these great big slingshots. And I'll buy some fish, and you can fire that fish up into the nest. Well, can you imagine what would have happened to that eaglet if this fish had just come flying into the nest? So we said, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it, but I think we'll pass on that. So people really, really do mean well. We appreciate people watching from Japan and New Zealand and Sweden and Europe and, you know, all over the United States. It really has been amazing how many people watch the eagles and really do care for them, and we appreciate that so much. So there are people that really, really mean well, but some of the things they want us to do, like building a shelter over the nest, no matter what it costs, are not appropriate for eagles because we want them to be wild. We don't want them to become dependent on us, and we have to enjoy them as they are. Okay, yes, Gail.
One quick question. I know after the 11 died, you were in the process of trying to bring back the remains.
Yes.
Where are you in the process of?
The paperwork is incredibly detailed. And I've kind of inherited that. And I'm incredibly busy right now, and so I haven't been able to complete it yet. So currently the body is still over in Athens. They are holding it for us, pending, we hope, approval to bring it back. And our plan is to have it mounted by a professional taxidermist, and so it would be on permanent display here. So.
How could you tell it was number 11?
Well, a lot of the really dedicated watchers that just watch all the time and recognize certain characteristics between the two decided that it must have been 11 that fell. Personally, I can't tell. I don't watch enough to know, but because they were so close in size, but there was apparently enough of a difference. There was some dark coloration is what one of them told me near the tail, that they decided that it was B11. I don't know for sure,
really,
but
it
it doesn't matter. So we'll go with B10 is the one we have now, and B11 is the one that fell. So.
Dr. Carleton, we're going to take
Yes, ma'am. What's your question?
How much food does a baby eaglet need to have for a day?
Food for a day. Okay, well, it depends on how big they are. When they're little, of course, they're not eating quite as much, but as they grow, they need more and more food. So they can eat about a fish that big a day, and that would be plenty of food. Now, a squirrel, part of a squirrel or something like that, they're getting, or the one that's left, B10, is getting plenty of food right now. Now, there may be times when you don't see food in the nest. That is part of growing up and being an eagle. B10 actually needs to lose a little weight before it can fly. If it was too heavy, it's going to have a lot of trouble flying. So it's actually, if it doesn't get enough food like we would think for ourselves every day, that's really not a bad thing. It can go without food for actually a day and not be starving. So, but that's a good question. Thank you very much. All right. All right. Well, thank you all for coming out and supporting the eagles. All right, now, Miss Gena. Are you Gena?
Are you Dr. Carleton?
I am. Gena is going to answer your questions as you view her wonderful work. And I have to thank her for letting me use all of her photographs. Aren't they terrific? All right, thank you all very much.